We're watching Twitter shares climb and presumably on the MDAU number. So that implies that investors are satisfied with user growth, at least on this platform, even though revenues came in short.
Yeah, I think the user growth is always going to be the key thing for Twitter. Also, I think one of the few stocks out there that certainly can benefit from the unfortunate lockdown. People are stuck at home or sort of stuck indoors ultimately, and having any kind of access, whether it's a Netflix type service or a social media like service like Twitter, certainly could benefit. I'm actually going to try to take a closer look at what they might guide for the current quarter, because what we've seen with Netflix and other sort of internet-related businesses where you're going to benefit from COVID, unfortunately, that there's a slowdown in the current quarter, right? So that there was maybe a pull forward in terms of more activity happening earlier on, that they're basically borrowing from later in the year. And I think that's the thing I want to get a closer look at. But yes, the uptick in users is definitely positive.
Yeah, and Julie, as you mentioned, the revenue trend through the latest month, that was positive. Specifically, though, on the ad revenues, they did come short of what analysts had been expecting. I guess there were some expectations that, ad revenue would be weak, but it did miss for the quarter here.
Absolutely. Definitely a miss in ad revenue. And the question, of course, Melissa, is how can Twitter grow its users by 20 million instead of the 7 million expected and still have ad revenue come so far short of expectations? And I think that comes down to a couple things. Advertisers are spending less. There's been a general contraction, and Twitter's ad revenue is very much tied to these live events, things like sports, like movies, which of course aren't happening right now. And also, I think it's worth noting the fact that 17 million of those, monetizable daily active users are overseas, and that's a market that Twitter hasn't built out as much yet, is not generating as much revenue per user as it does from the users here in the U.S.
Yeah, Ed, I think that's a good point in terms of what Twitter, the activity benefits from. All the things that are not happening because of COVID, but what it will happen are the elections. So it'll be interesting to see if they comment on the political environment, how it helps the business, but also, as Jack Dorsey gets ready to go to the Hill on July 27th, what some of the regulatory issues are for the company.
I mean, I think the regulatory-wise, it's interesting. Maybe it's a little bit silly. I mean, Twitter is relatively small compared to Facebook, Google, even Snap. Actually, is bigger now, at least in terms of its user base. So, I think Twitter, at the same time, is a big amplifying mechanism. So whether it's President Trump or sort of stock issues or any kind of sort of world-changing events or world news events, Twitter is an important element. So yes, it's influential, but in terms of its size, in terms of its sort of whatever power it has, it's relatively small. The other question I have really at this point is, what is Twitter going forward? I mean, I personally, I'm on the service all the time, but I don't think it's ever going to get quite as big as Facebook, certainly. And so where does it live in this sort of social media universe? I kind of feel like it's more sort of like a sentiment meter, right? There's a lot of people who access Twitter's data. They have a fire hose that they sell that actually is their best performing business, at least in terms of year-over-year growth. It tends to be like sort of a data or even an ad tech kind of company, at least in terms of what its value is, as opposed to sort of a more of a consumer-facing or front-facing business.